Hello and welcome to another episode of Global Tantrum, the show where two or more political scientists, it's been two recently, occasionally we have guests, do our darndest to explain the post-war order, first to ourselves and then hopefully to you. I am your host, Steve Halley. With me, as per usual, is my co-host, Professor Galen Jackson, coming from his library in sunny Western Massachusetts. Galen, how the heck are you?
Yeah, man. I'm like Ron Burgundy. I have many leather-bound books, and
They
my
look,
office
I
smells of
see
rich
that.
mahogany.
Yeah.
Well,
Scotch, scotch, scotch.
doing all right, man. I mean,
Good.
I'm always better in the summertime. How you doing?
Yeah, same deal, I guess. We're still 2 months away from the worst part of the summer, fire season here in Southern
Mhm.
California. So we're chilling. We'll get the July 4th holiday coming up as well. So
America turns 250.
crazy
Yeah.
quarter century. And,
Qu-
by the
Quarter,
standards,
quarter of a millennium.
sorry, quarter of a millennium. Silly. Yes, quarter of a millennium. By the standards of the region of the world that we're going to talk about today, that is not very old at all. It's actually very new, not as new as a quarter century. But yeah, the people we're going to talk about now have been fighting over the same patch of ground for hundreds and indeed thousands of years. That's right. We're going to Lebanon today, right, Galen? And we're going to talk about everybody's favorite political party slash militia slash terrorist group, Hezbollah. Why are we talking about Hezbollah today? Why is Hezbollah important? Because Hezbollah and Israel are still fighting over southern Lebanon. This is one of the major remaining sticking points in the peace deal between Iran and the United States. The United States trying to close out the Iran war, the failed Iran war, in which it achieved none of its objectives strategically, other than reopening the strait, which was open before the war started. Iran getting a great deal. We talked about that in the recent past on this show. But the war has not necessarily ended for two other parties to the war, Israel and Hezbollah. And we talked a little about Israel last week. Today, we're going to go into the other side of that conflict, Hezbollah, who these guys are, where they came from, what they want, and how dangerous are they, really? So, yeah, that's the frame. Galen, can you kick us off by explaining what Hezbollah is and kind of where they came from?
Sure. First thing, we've still got time on the clock in this 60-day negotiating window. And
True.
boilerplate, always never know where things are going to go in the Middle East. So I think things do not look good right now in the negotiations, but you never know.
Mm-hmm.
Hezbollah. This is going to be kind of a long-winded answer, so I'll do my best to, hit the highlights. But it's an Islamist political party that operates in Lebanon. As you were just saying, if you were going to ask me what I think the most fragile piece of the ceasefire is right now, it's the Lebanese front.
Mm-hmm.
The Israelis have indicated pretty clearly they do not want to stop fighting. They view Hezbollah as, at least on their doorstep, their biggest threat and an extension of Iran, and in particular of the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And there is something to that. So, first thing I'll say, it's an Islamist party. Its goal is to set up an Islamic state similar to the one that exists in Iran. Actually, Hezbollah, the word itself is Hizb in Arabic, means party, and Allah is obviously God. So it's the party of God.
Pretty
Uh,
straightforward. Which god?
yes, Allah.
Allah, but a special flavor of Allah, right?
Well, it's a Shia political movement, if that's
There you
what you're,
go. Yep.
which is important for reasons we'll get to. So, where does Hezbollah come from? It's a bit of a long story that has to do with the long and rather tragic history of Lebanon. Lebanon, I've never been. I've wanted to go for a long time, but it's always kind of a tough time to go for reasons we're talking about. Beirut used to be called the Paris of the Middle East. It was
Right.
once an economically vibrant place, particularly, it's one of the only places in the Middle East without a lot of oil where you could say that. But it has been hamstrung by its internal politics for a very long time. Most notably it had a brutal civil war starting in 1975 that didn't end until 1990. The cause of that civil war has to do with the internal demographics of the country. So I think there's technically something like 17 different denominations within Lebanon. The big ones are the Maronite Christians, Sunni Muslims, Shia Muslims, and Druze. And Lebanon has a confessional political system. In other words, political power is apportioned on the basis of those demographics.
I always forget the Druze, but I'm glad you brought them up. Don't sleep on the Druze.
I think I only remembered I wrote a research paper on them in grad school at one point, man. So
Yeah.
yeah. People are interested. It's ethnic group spans. There's actually Druze in Israel, spans kind of the Levant part of the world. In practice, what does this mean? The president of Lebanon is always a Maronite Christian. The prime minister is always a Sunni Muslim. The speaker of the parliament is always Shia. I think the chief of staff of the armed forces is always Druze. So that's the way the country's politics operates. That actually worked okay for a while. The problem is demographics change, but that means some groups are going to lose out. So I believe the last time there was a census in Lebanon was in the early 1930s, because if you did an official one now, political power would most likely be reapportioned.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not the only reason you get a civil war. You know, you get an influx of the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO.
Right. They got kicked out of Jordan, right?
Got kicked out of Jordan during Black September 1970 and relocated to southern Lebanon. So not only did that kind of open up a new front against Israel in the north, but it also upset the country's delicate demographic balance. Syrians also intervene for a variety of reasons. And so Lebanon kind of becomes a playing field for outside powers as well. And so you get this really, really extended, brutal civil war. And in the midst of that, Israel invades Lebanon. They have kind of a few different things they're trying to do. Their main goal is to drive the PLO out of the south. More ambitiously, they kind of want to impose a Maronite president in Lebanon who will sign a peace treaty with them, end the Palestinian issue once and for all, finalize Israel's border in the north. It ends up not going very well. And one of the reasons for that is this is the context in which Hezbollah emerges as a resistance force initially to the Israeli military forces that invade the south. And they are actively helped in this by revolutionary Iran. So the Iranians are now, when this all happens, again, this is 1982, 1983. The revolution is only a few years old. They're in the midst of this epic struggle with the Iraqis, but they see this opportunity to mobilize a potential coherent Shia political force and military force in southern Lebanon to pose a threat to the Israelis.
It's funny to me that the Ayatollahs are like fighting for their lives at this point in time, but they still find the time and resources to cultivate Hezbollah.
There's a good documentary about, I think it's called Iran in the West, where like they interview some of the original IRGC guys, and apparently Ayatollah Khomeini needed some convincing on this, but
yeah, it doesn't seem like a good use of resources right now, but you know, they did it.
But they would argue, I mean, actually, if you watch that documentary, you can tell they're very proud of this, that they were instrumental in organizing, training, later equipping what ultimately becomes Hezbollah. I don't think they officially declare themselves as an organization for a few years in 1985. Notably, they declare themselves loyal to the supreme leader of Iran in that document, which we'll get to in a bit, is arguably a political liability for them in much of the Arab world, including within Lebanon itself. One of their first major acts, by the way, is the United States and France and a few other countries send peacekeeping forces to Lebanon in the midst of the civil war to oversee the removal of the PLO from Lebanon as a result of the Israeli invasion. Hezbollah bombs not only the French embassy, but the US embassy, and then months later, the US Marine barracks.
Hundreds of
And
casualties.
the suicide bomb that kills something
Yeah.
like 240 Marines. So that is kind of the birth of the organization. Iran really plays on, you see this today with Iran. Where does Iran have proxies? Tends to be in countries where you don't have stable, centralized political authority. Think the Houthis in Yemen, think Shia militias in Iraq, particularly after the US invasion in 2003. They tend to align with other Shia groups. Hezbollah is not terribly popular among many Lebanese now, except in the Shia areas, principally in the south and east of Lebanon. So that's kind of how Iran operates with these groups. And, you know, Hezbollah has also benefited from framing itself as a resistance force. Arguably, its biggest accomplishment, and when it was at its height in popularity terms in the Arab world, was when Israel withdrew in 2000 after occupying a security belt in southern Lebanon for 15 years.
Around the same time they withdrew from Gaza, right? If I'm remembering
That was
correctly.
2005.
Okay, a little bit
Um,
before then.
but yeah, I mean, that period is when Hezbollah and its then Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah are viewed as quite popular. And in 2006, they fight kind of a month-long war, which the Israelis, in strictly tactical military terms, certainly hit more targets, but is viewed as sort of a draw.
Right.
And again, allows Hezbollah to pose as a resistance force. I should say Hezbollah sort of provokes that war by kidnapping, I think, 2 Israeli soldiers is the immediate cause.
So,
More recently, outside of the Shia areas, not as popular because particularly after the Arab Spring, they become viewed by many in the Arab world as doing Iran's bidding.
which they are, to be clear.
Yeah. Well, so we'll get to this in a bit, I'm sure. Like, to the extent Iran controls Hezbollah, I don't know if I would go that far, but it is an extremely close partnership. And particularly over the last 2 years, which I'll let you talk about what happened 2 years ago to them, the IRGC, I think, has really flexed its muscles in terms of how it coordinates with Hezbollah and has taken the reins more firmly. But during the Syrian civil war, Hezbollah sends a lot of forces to help uphold the Assad regime. And the organization has taken a political hit in Lebanon more recently because it is seen as dragging Lebanon into wars at Iran's behest.
Mhm.
Now, that's somewhat offset by the fact that they get a lot of popularity when they're seen as opposing the Israelis, particularly post October 7th and the war in Gaza. And then the last thing I'll say, Hezbollah is also a political party. It has seats in the Lebanese parliament. Something like 6, 7 years ago, they had a significant chunk of power in the Lebanese parliament. I think they've lost some seats since then. And they do things like provide social services, things that a central government would be doing most of the time, at least in the Shia parts of the country.
Right.
And so it is correct to call them a state within a state. And you could argue actually they are stronger than the Lebanese central government, certainly in the areas it occupies, but it's definitely the strongest military force in Lebanon. And that, at essence, is the root of the problem. Israelis have this difficult issue where, whenever Hezbollah launches rockets into the north of the country, or as we said, kidnaps Israeli soldiers or what have you, they obviously are going to retaliate, but they have also experienced setbacks when they have invaded the country militarily. And the only viable solution here is a political one. And because of the way Lebanon operates politically, that's really, really hard to do. And that's all been compounded more recently by the fact that Lebanon's economy has pretty much been in free fall since like 2019.
Yeah.
I'll
So
stop there.
if it was a failing state before, it's like most of the way failed at this point in time. Getting bombed by the Israelis certainly hasn't helped matters, but they've had their own issues above and beyond that, including like major fiscal issues. And the Lebanese currency basically went to zero, I think 6 or 7 years ago. And yeah, the poverty rate exploded. They're kind of back on their feet now, but not really. So this is obviously fertile ground for a group like Hezbollah that has external support, is well organized, and critically has a lot of military power. We talked some number of months ago about Mexico and Mexican cartels, the major Mexican cartels. The situation isn't completely analogous because Mexico is not a failed state. It's much stronger than the Lebanese state. But there is kind of these parallels you can draw with these incredibly like well-resourced groups that are just impossible to root out, even by external forces like the Israelis. And so when we talk about Hezbollah, you mentioned this, it's kind of like two sides to the coin. There's a political side of the coin where, they are a Lebanese political party and they provide goods and services to the people living under their control. For instance, like jobs and medical insurance, which the Lebanese state really can't do at this point in time, partly because it's always getting attacked because Hezbollah is there. And then on the other hand, it has tens of thousands of very capable fighters. It is an army.
Yep.
And it is an army notably equipped with tens of thousands. It used to be hundreds of thousands, but it may be down to tens. I'm not sure. Tens of thousands of short-range missiles that were once provided mostly by Iran directly. Now they are domestically manufactured. And it used to be the case that these missiles were dumb missiles. They had inertial guidance. That's just a fancy way of saying, like, you point them in the direction you want them to go, and you launch large numbers of them. And you hope that one or several hit something important. And Israel is nearby, the north of Israel especially, and it is small and it's concentrated. But if you're using these dumb missiles, it's still hard to hit stuff. It's harder to hit stuff. A big innovation starting a few years ago was the Iranians figured out that they could send GPS kits through Syria to Hezbollah instead of trying to transmit or put on trucks these missiles, because the Israelis have air superiority over Syria and parts of Iraq as well. They were interdicting these convoys because they're easy to find and blowing them up before they could get to Hezbollah. So Hezbollah wasn't getting the latest and greatest in Iranian technology. Much easier to smuggle a suitcase-sized GPS kit, which is what's been happening for the last several years. They can convert these dumb missiles, which are manufactured domestically in southern Lebanon. They have underground factories, just like the Iranians, and workshops and things like this. For $5,000 to $10,000, you can take one of these dumb short-range missiles and graft a GPS guidance onto it, making it a smart short-range missile, which is far more dangerous, probably 10 times more dangerous. And the Israelis cannot abide this because all of their northern territories are within range of these now thousands of precision GPS-guided short-range missiles.
Yeah, and we forgot to say, which sorry, I was remiss in my summary. Hezbollah from the beginning has, as its stated policy, the destruction of Israel.
Yes.
And has, going back to 1985 in their covenant, they reiterated that in their 2009 covenant. Hassan Nasrallah, who we'll talk about, called Israel like a cancerous growth in 2013 and called for it to get wiped off the map. So, the rhetoric that Hezbollah uses very much mirrors what Iranian leaders have used in the past.
Iran and Hamas as well.
Yeah.
And the Houthis and all these guys.
The difference from Iran is that Hezbollah is right next door.
Yes, it's right next door. And again, it's like if I'm the average Lebanese person in Beirut, is it a big priority for me to destroy Israel? Probably not, right? So Hezbollah has this dual loyalty, which you spoke to earlier. It's like, what is Hezbollah's actual priority here? Is it to make life better for people living in southern Lebanon, or is it to destroy Israel, or is it kind of both? Because trying to destroy Israel also results in the destruction of Lebanon, to your earlier point.
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting dynamic on both sides, right? Like Hezbollah again, there was actually a good article on this in Foreign Affairs a couple of years ago. Like Hezbollah's popularity is really not strong except among Lebanese Shia communities.
And
Like
that's enough because they're geographically concentrated in the south,
but
right?
in terms of like their ability to survive as an entity, yes, their popularity went up a bit among the other groups in Lebanon, kind of in direct proportion to their frustration with the war in Gaza. But they don't have a far reach. And by the way, according to that poll, like those views almost exactly track on views of Iran. Lebanese Shia have much higher approval ratings for Iran than the rest of the country does. And so it's like maybe Hezbollah doesn't care, but since it's a political entity and its goal is to establish an Islamic government in Lebanon, presumably they sort of do what the rest of the country thinks. And it's this thing where like their popularity goes up if they are seen as protecting Lebanon's interests against Israel, but it goes down if they are seen to be provoking Israel and getting the whole country dragged into a war that's perceived to be Iran's war.
Which is what they did starting in 2023 or 2024.
I think it was the day after October 7th, 2023, Hezbollah started shooting rockets into the north of Israel. Now, most of them didn't hit anything, but if you're the Israelis, you still have to evacuate tens of thousands of your citizens from the north of the country. And the Israelis then decided that they were going to land some blows against Hezbollah. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, this is the infamous pager attack, which we've referenced elsewhere on this show in the past. I think this was later in 2024. It took some time to set up.
September 2024, and then Nasrallah was assassinated like a week or two later. Yeah.
Yeah. So Hezbollah had stopped using mobile phones, I think, because those were pretty easy to trace for Israeli intelligence. They had switched to pagers, which are a little bit lower tech. Israel infiltrated the supply chain for these pagers, wherever they bought these pagers en masse, to sort of organize their political and military activities in the south of Lebanon. You get a page and then you make a phone call from a landline, I suppose. At least that's how it worked in the 1990s. I never had a pager, but
neither did I, man. I remember adults had them and it was super cool at the time.
Yeah, it's like, oh man, you can send messages. That's wow, yeah, amazing. Yeah, and also, of course, drug dealers. But anyway,
that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, the Mossad, most likely, we think, basically got its hands on these pagers somehow and stuffed them with explosives. And then on one day, they activated those explosives, killed, I think, maybe a dozen or more Hezbollah operatives, and wounded hundreds, all at one stroke. So this put a lot.
And generally, like, the people toward the top of the organization.
Correct. Like the people doing the organizing and the communicating. Yeah. So at one stroke, this took a bunch of those people offline for a while. They're now missing fingers, hands, eyes, etc. Takes some time to convalesce from that. And also, it rendered telephonic communication impossible. Because are you now going to use pagers again after that? Probably not. They fell all the way back to pen and paper, which is what they're still using, basically couriers with pen and paper. I don't know if they're doing carrier pigeons, but they probably would if they had enough trained. So they do this this master stroke, this basically blanket assassination And then they follow up by assassinating the longtime leader of Hezbollah. And the thinking then is Hezbollah has been destroyed. It's no longer a going concern, right, Galen?
Yeah, and I just want, like, Nasrallah, obviously not a person that I admire.
No.
Has said some pretty awful things, but like that was seen as a big loss to Hezbollah and the Iranians because he was viewed by many as like a charismatic leader. I think he first became the organization's secretary general in 1992, thereabouts anyway. So had been in this role for 30 years and was the guy responsible for really molding it into a potent military and political force. So, you know, obviously along with the help of the Iranians. So his assassination was seen as a big loss to them. I think the current Secretary General is Naim Qassem, is not viewed as, you know, nearly as potent a figure.
Perhaps not, but the organization persists.
So this is what I wanted to get to next.
Yeah.
You know, there's a million things, by the way, we could talk about. That's also important. I mean, the only other point I'll make before we get into the implications of all of this is traditionally Iran saw Hezbollah as kind of its ace in the hole when it came to deterrence against Israel.
Right.
So until April 2024, when Israel hit a number of Iranian operatives in Syria, and in retaliation, it was kind of a telegraphed attack, and they didn't send most of their, you know, best stuff. But Iran shot a number of missiles and drones at Israel. Until then, Iranian-Israeli rivalry had sort of played out in the shadows. It was all kind of like covert action, you know, assassinations, things like that, cyber activity, sabotage. You mentioned Israel striking sites in Syria throughout the Syrian civil war. As you said, that was meant primarily to disrupt Iran from setting up more stations in Syria and getting weapons to Lebanon for Hezbollah.
While they were at it, they also destroyed basically the entire Syrian Air Force on the ground. Because why not?
Well, not the first time the Israelis have wiped out an entire Air Force.
True.
That changed in 2024. We now have, and especially as of 2026, we have direct conventional strikes where Iran and Israel target one another.
Mm-hmm.
So the rivalry has gotten more dangerous and is much more out in the open and has escalated to a real extent. The question I now have is, where do we go from here? So I was quite sympathetic to the argument, okay, the Israelis pulled off this incredible beeper operation. Like, and, you know, intelligence people were just like, wow, how did they do that?
Right.
And, you know, that comes on top of having not destroyed Hamas, but obviously done real damage to it as a result of the war in Gaza. Obviously, the strikes of last June against Iran. The Assad government fell, we should say, in December 2024, which was a big blow to the Iranians.
Mm-hmm.
They expended huge amount of material and resources, training, supplying, backing the Assads to turn the tide of the war. Qasem Soleimani, the former head of Iran's Quds Force, which is the arm of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, responsible for foreign operations, who Trump ordered assassinated in January 2020. He was running that whole show in Syria. So that was a big loss for them and severed the so-called land bridge.
Mm-hmm.
It's more difficult for Iran to get weapons to Hezbollah. So all of this was seen as putting Hezbollah substantially on the back foot. That and many of their weapons caches were reportedly destroyed by the Israelis. And yet, we are now in the situation seemingly again. As you said, Hezbollah now has gotten better at building having smarter rockets.
Mm-hmm.
They're also now using wire-guided drones, which is sort of a new development on the Israeli-Lebanese front. The Israelis are taking countermeasures, of course, but that's a new element. I always get back to this problem of, okay, yes, this is a tactical success by the Israelis. Strategically, what have they accomplished? And yet I don't know what the policy would be. I'm not saying you have to say anything remotely close to what Itamar Ben-Gvir, who we discussed last week, said. He tweeted something awful about, for every Israeli tear, like Lebanese mother, like 1,000 people should die, something to that effect.
Hmm.
But it's this problem where if you don't like the Israeli policy of mowing the lawn, it is an organization, Hezbollah, dedicated to the destruction of Israel, backed by its foremost adversary, which is also dedicated to the destruction of Israel. And you can't solve it without a political solution. And that's seemingly impossible to do because of Lebanon's internal political makeup. So
Yeah.
I don't know what the policy implication would be.
Yeah, it's a great question because Israel has tried and failed to destroy Hezbollah once and for all. Well, I don't know what the objectives were in 2006, but they kind of ran into a wall attempting to do that.
I
And
mean, they did land a lot more blows than Hezbollah did, but
they took casualties.
They took casualties, and more fundamentally, they didn't alter anything politically in
No.
fundamental terms, right? It was actually
Yes.
seen as basically a draw.
Yeah, and then this operation in late 2024, it's like they succeeded in substantially disrupting the organization for some period of time. Like, I don't think there's any question about that. But were they able to follow it up and kill all, 50,000 fighters or however many people they have under arms in southern Lebanon? No, obviously not. They don't have the people to do, like, Israel doesn't have a sufficient military force to do that, to actually, try to invade Lebanon, occupy Lebanon, while also doing Gaza. It's too much at the same time. And they weren't able to do it in the 1980s anyway, right?
And like, obviously things might resume with Iran, right?
Yes. So they're pulled in too many different directions. And even when they were concentrating on it 40 years ago, they didn't have the wherewithal to do it. So I'm not sure what would change now, right?
Well, and that war is seen as a major strategic misstep.
Yeah.
There was
it was pretty expensive,
Well, and it really tarnished Israel's image internationally. There's infamous massacres in 1982 at Palestinian refugee camps called Sabra and Shatila, which the IDF did not perpetrate, but they were sort of standing by while the massacres went on. They didn't achieve any of their goals. There actually was a peace treaty signed between Lebanon and Israel in 1983, but it had no legitimacy and basically collapsed, almost immediately.
That's the thing that we've talked about. It's like anything Lebanon signs isn't worth the paper it's written on because Lebanon barely exists. It's like it's Hezbollah stand. Hezbollah is kind of hiding behind this facade of the Lebanese state. But in reality, like, they have their own state. And this is a state that has an agenda, and it's an Iranian agenda. To your earlier point, the Iranian agenda seems to be to destroy Israel. It's not seems to be, it's pretty obvious. And they repeat it over and over again.
Certainly among certain members of the Iranian government who I would argue have been empowered recently. So yes, I think that's a fair thing to say.
I think so too. So yeah, like, your question is like, what are the what can they do about this? They're in a pickle.
This is what I thought. I mean, I guess it is a different way of saying what you said earlier about the comparison with the Mexican drug problem, the cartel problem, is like, you can score tactical success after tactical success, but without any sort of fundamental political resolution, which to me seems as far out of reach as it ever has, then you are left with this mowing the grass policy.
Eventually, you're going to lose. That's the other thing. It's like, you can string as many successes as you want in a row. Eventually, you're going to lose. And these people, Hezbollah and Iran and Hamas, seem perfectly willing to wait for that to happen and to keep dying in large numbers.
I don't know if you'll necessarily lose, but you need to have alternative ways of dealing with the problem. And the issue is that seems pretty now, even that, I think it would certainly help if you could do something with the Palestinian question.
Always.
But one, like, I just don't even see how that's possible for a million reasons right now. But even if that were to happen, like if we woke up tomorrow and we're all shocked,
There's a
and then
Palestinian state.
Yahoo was
Wow.
like, we have a Palestinian state and we're going to live in peace, a Palestinian state beside a Jewish state. I don't think Hezbollah and Iran would then just stop. Like, I really don't.
I don't either.
I don't think that's
So
what they're all about.
yeah, back to the narrow question of what to do about Hezbollah. Like one obvious but challenging answer is to try to empower the Lebanese state, right?
Which has been tried many times.
Yeah, by a bunch of parties, including probably Israel. You know more about it than I do.
Like, that's been US policy, right? Is
Right.
to try to build out more state capacity. The Lebanese armed forces, by the way, are one of the only institutions in the country that gets high approval ratings from most Lebanese. But it's a fairly small fighting force, and it's geared primarily for like maintaining internal security. It's not
Right.
it's not
Hezbollah,
something.
yeah,
Yeah.
cannot be integrated into the Lebanese national army because my understanding is the army also has ethnic quotas or confessional quotas along the lines of the Lebanese government. So if Hezbollah were to join, that would obviously immediately unbalance the army in favor of the Lebanese Shia. So
Yeah.
that's not going to work. Plus, why would they do that? They have their own system set up that is working well on its own terms, and its own terms are to advance the interests of the Lebanese Shia in the south and Iran.
Yeah. I do think, I mean, we've said it several times. I do think it's worth restating. Like, Iran was there from the beginning.
Yeah.
They view Hezbollah as an enormous accomplishment. It is clearly their most potent and important proxy. And I think Hezbollah tends to be quite aligned with what the Iranians want them to do. And actually, was it last week, the week before, when Iran fired shots again at Israel directly? My read of the reporting of that was essentially Hezbollah had intervened when the shooting started back in February on Iran's behalf, and that was Iran showing that it would reciprocate on behalf of its client. So it is a quite close relationship. I mean, I guess as we're talking about this, the thing that stands out is this reveals the fault lines in this new order that is, you can't even call it order. Whatever you want to call state of affairs in the Middle East, right? Is like there's this current major jockeying going on in Iraq, which is not new by any means, where Iraq is sort of torn in two directions between what the Americans want and what the Iranians want.
Mm-hmm.
Syria was a big battleground, which went against the Iranians. This is like, I guess I'm saying it's going to be a long-term problem, and it's going to be dependent upon what the political orders that emerge in these places are. And that could take a long time. And I don't know which way the chips are going to fall.
It's interesting. The more we talk
Yeah.
about this and hearing your explanations and like seeing the like extremely tough strategic circumstances that Israelis find themselves in, it becomes more and more not clear, but like understandable why the Israeli government would want to roll the dice the way that they did against Iran. Like, even if they knew that there was only a 5% chance of it happening, it might have been a way out, right? Because if the Iranian government had really changed, perhaps, it would have stopped supporting Hezbollah, to name just one group, Hamas as well. And Israel would have more wherewithal, more ability to deal with these groups. The Lebanese state would have more of an ability to deal with Hezbollah. But as it stands, it's like it's pretty strong on its own terms. And then it has this sort of external pipeline of weapons, expertise, money, and it's just extremely difficult to deal with.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if we want to relitigate the Iraq war, or maybe it would be worth doing a fresh look at 2003. But like that to me is really where this all goes off the rails.
Yeah.
Obviously, as we've discussed, Saddam Hussein, not a good guy. But when the Americans decapitated the Iraqi state with no plan in place for how to restore political order or really do anything once he was gone, that removed the principal barrier to Iran's ability to project influence, especially asymmetrically and covertly across the Middle East. And
Still dealing with it.
been dealing with the fallout ever since.
Yeah.
And, you know, do I think there's any number of things the Israelis could have done differently? Like, absolutely. The Palestinian issue being, you know, the obvious one. But that goes back decades. Even there, you're still left with the question of, like, let me tell you, Hamas, like, I don't think there's a debate anymore about whether Hamas is willing to accept a two-state solution. I think we found out very clearly that they're not.
Exactly. Same with Hezbollah, same with Iran, right?
Yeah.
At the moment, with the people in charge. And so if you're Israel, like, what do you do? I mean, the net, like, other than like trying to increase Lebanese state capacity, which is hard to do when you're fighting Hezbollah because you end up bombing Beirut, the southern suburbs especially.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I'll say is, and granted, his name is escaped, Shara, Ahmed al-Shara, the new president
Syrian.
of Syria.
Yeah.
Granted that he is a former Al-Qaeda guy.
Yeah.
Well, with that stipulation, like, I don't think it makes sense for Israel to be taking a tough line against this new Syrian government, which Trump has indicated he's interested in building more ties. Like, if you could flip Syria, that would go a long way. Like, that was a big loss for the Iranians for a number of reasons. So, you know, doing things like that, trying to rebuild your position in the Arab world. Now that's easier said than done.
Especially right now. Yeah.
Especially right now.
Yeah.
But this is a problem. It was tantalizingly close, it seemed, back in 2024. And yet it's only been about a year and a half. And here we are again. So it's going to be a long-term problem.
I agree.
Unfortunately.
Such a bummer, this show. Let's call it there. But hey, that's how a global tantrum works, right, Galen?
I mean, it is called Global Tantrum.
For a reason. Great.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks again for a great show. If you like what we do, remember to smash that subscribe button. And we will see you all next week.